Hey, my friends, this is Bill, not the reading or writing or math doctor, just me wanting to share some thoughts with you from my heart. I've been a teacher for 12 years and consulting now for close to 20. And I have realized over the last 10 years that for a lot of kids, you could have the greatest content and curriculum in the world. You can get to the highest level of rigor. But for some kids, there's a connection that's just not missing that we're never going to reach with a program where we only are going to be able to reach them by being real. The reason I chose this background is that a lot of kids are like that background there, just in darkness, looking for a light. And for some of them, not even their families are a light. Like there's darkness when they go home. And the only place that maybe they can find some light is in us as teachers. And so, if you could, for a few minutes, just see yourself as that lighthouse that can bring hope and light to some students who are just going through a dark, discouraging time in their lives. And I want to share with you that for every child, there's an imaginary wire that connects their hearts to their heads. And for some kids, someone or something has cut that wire, causing a disconnect. And the only way I can explain it is that for some kids, if this is the child and this is life, there's like a gap that's created around them. And in the very first Rocky movie, his best friend asked him, "Why do you want to marry my sister?" And he said, "Well, I've got gaps, and she fills those gaps." And so I want to maybe help you see that when we as teachers can start building relationships and connecting with our kids on an emotional and mental level, that we're going to fill those gaps with kids. I'm writing a book that I'm going to finish this summer, and it's called Turning Their Horns to Halos, Managing and Motivating the Hearts and Minds of Difficult Students. And if you're just a parent who has a child who's struggling, then this book would maybe be helpful for you as well. And the big theme is just two acronyms with the word gaps and how we can fill those gaps. So I just want to spend a few minutes today not talking about math, reading, writing, or any subject. I just want to talk about how to connect with kids. So, as you'll see here, the title of my book, as I mentioned, is called Turning Their Horns to Halos, Filling in the Gaps, Managing and Motivating the Hearts and Minds of Difficult Students. And it's got a cute little cover page, but we've got to figure out, and we're running out of time with the culture and the state our country is in and the hearts of our nation. So I just wanted to spend a few minutes sharing with you a summary of the gaps that I'm going to be talking about in this book. The first gaps is getting attention, physical, and social. And when I say gaps, I mean things that are missing in their lives. And I know, like, for this first one, people will say it's more blessed to give than to receive. But for a lot of kids, they've never gotten anything. They come from such poor backgrounds or from backgrounds where parents and siblings are so busy, they never get anything. And so we wonder why they misbehave, why they don't follow our rules. And I'm going to show you how to give so that they can get some of the things that have been missing in their lives. For some kids, there's attention, and we all know it that if you're not going to give kids positive attention, they're going to do whatever they can to get whatever attention they can. And you can see on this firsthand, it's the heart, it's the emotional gaps that sometimes happen. And so it's so important that we pay attention to our kids, that we don't just demand they look at us when we're teaching, but that we look them straight in the eye and we hear what their heart is sometimes speaking that their mouth would never say, that we listen to what's coming out of their minds through their mouths, but sometimes we have to infer. Pay attention to your kids. Sometimes they need that time where you're willing to say, it's not about a grade in my grade book. It's just you and me getting to know each other face to face. And whether it's something that you speak to them or write to them, and sometimes even about them in a positive way to their parents, make sure that they start getting positive attention so that they won't be seeking it in other ways. The next gap is disturbing for me because there's been, excuse me, in this last year and a half, because of the pandemic, they have called our way of living social distancing. Well, we've had social distancing long before the virus, but what's really been happening the past year and a half is physical distancing. And if your children have not gotten a hug or a handshake or a fist pump or a pat on the back, a high five, just something appropriate and affectionate in terms of touch, if all they've been getting is spanked or a punch or physical abuse of some kind, then their heart is completely empty when it comes to positive physical and appropriate affection that we can give them. And that leads me to the social gaps that sometimes happen. We wonder, after all the things that they've gone through, why they have some weird quirks when it comes to interacting with you or with others socially. You know, I remember one time that in one of my schools, there was a student who was basically a straight A student, and everything was going great, high grades, connecting with all of her classmates, her peers, her teachers. And then this one day, and this is what, I don't want to get into great detail, but this is what basically happened. She came home to her one bedroom house that had maybe five or six, seven kids with parents. And she was the first one to see that her sister had hung herself because she couldn't deal with whatever was happening in her life socially. She wasn't getting things, she wasn't receiving positive attention. There was no appropriate physical touch coming from her peers, her teachers, her parents. And so, because she didn't know how to react socially, she, like many other kids have done nowadays, decided to take her own life. And so This first section is going to be how to fill the emotional gaps of your students. Part two is going to be filling in the mental gaps. And as I mentioned, the other thumb is the student, but this thumb here is the people, the circumstances, the events, the places sometimes that cause the gaps that are not just emotional, like I mentioned before, but the mental gaps that cause a disconnect with a lot of students. And so when we learn how to give to them, they're going to learn how to give to others, not just gifts, but positive affirmation, attention, time, energy, effort. I would just love it if we could show kids how to give everything they have and who they are to some cause that's bigger than themselves. Some of us only focus on the academic gaps, and that's so unfortunate. Yes, it's important, but in this chapter, I'm going to be talking about the learning styles of students. Too many times we say as teachers, we go to a training and they present something to you and you're like, oh, that's not my teaching style. Well, it doesn't matter. What really matters is what is the learning style of your student or your students. And so you need to change the way that you teach in the same way that a doctor would give a different prescription for his patients. Sometimes, yes, they only need band-aids, but other times your kids need surgery. They need an MRI, and you can see something going wrong with the X-ray called the test scores, but we can't just keep moving on and going to the next teak or the next topic or the subject. We've got to figure out how to teach those visual learners, the kids that are verbal learners, the auditory learners, and the kinesthetic learners, so that there's a connection that takes place, not a disconnect that's being caused by our cookie cutter mentality when it comes to teaching. The psychological gaps come when you hear something so much from other people, supposedly people that care about you, that are supposed to put your interest first. If you hear something long enough about what a horrible person you are, how useless you are, how stupid you are, how you're you don't belong in this world, well, guess what? Psychologically, perception is reality. The student, the kids are going to start thinking of themselves that way, and we want to be able to start pouring water onto the seeds of their minds so that we can begin to grow flowers and bouquets of roses, not weeds that are just choking out their psychological view of themselves, their families, and the world. The last one, sometimes we want to just completely avoid this, but if a child has spiritual gaps, I'm not talking about religion here, I'm talking about character, integrity, honesty, what some of you in your church call the fruits of the Spirit, we call character traits, personality traits. And if they're not going to learn how to have faith in something or someone outside of themselves and learn to be able to build character and integrity and how to connect with people in all of those other ways, it's going to cause that disconnect, that spiritual disconnect, which is probably one of the ways that can make the biggest impact. We're told to love God and with everything that we have, with all our hearts, soul, mind, and strength, and love everyone else as much as we love ourselves. Well, if you have a hard time loving God, then start with loving others. And sometimes, because we can't even love ourselves, because of what we've been hearing from other people, we have a hard time learning how to love others. And we tend to want to blame God or whatever your religious symbol is for the way your life has turned out. You know, this last year and a half has been quite a test for all of us. For some of you, I've heard that you've been able to use the trials and the tribulations of life and turn them around, and that your life is better than it's ever been. Some of you, because of the way that things happened, your reactions, your actions, the things that you've said and the things you've done have perhaps hardened your heart, and you've disconnected yourself from others. And so there's going to be a gap. And if you think of every person, adult and child, as a bowl, as long as that bowl is solid and has a firm foundation, you can pour all the things into it that you want, and it's going to be safe, it's going to be secure, and it's going to stay there. But unfortunately, too many kids look more like colanders full of gaps and holes. And if you're an adult listening to this and your life has some gaps, giving, academic, psychological, and spiritual, when it comes to mentally, or getting attention, physical, and social gaps when it comes to emotionally, then we're never going to be able to get to the levels that we want to, because in my experience, until the gaps in our hearts are filled and the gaps in our mind are filled, we're never going to be able to build on that foundation. So let me just encourage you, think of yourself as maybe one finger for perhaps one student in your classroom. Which gap can you fill for one child this coming year in your classroom? Think about the kids from last year. What gaps do they come to your classroom with? And did you do or say or be something for them to help fill in some of those gaps so that they could have a foundation that would allow them to get to another level emotionally and mentally, and in the end, yes, academically. But until you build relationships with your kids, they're not going to care how relevant your program is, your subject, your teaching is, and could care less how rigorous it is. Until we can learn how to help kids build a character in themselves because of being an example, then all the content and the curriculum in the world is not going to make a difference. So one of the trainings that I offer is managing and motivating students by filling in the gaps. And so if you feel like this is something that you might need, I've done this training a couple of times this summer, and the feedback that I've gotten from teachers has been just monumental in terms of helping them see themselves from a completely different perspective and point of view. God bless you guys. Spend this summer thinking about how you can personally fill in the gaps of your students. I'm going to have this book ready in a month or so. I hope that it can help you with almost 35 years in education and another 10 or 15 years as a children's pastor, a youth pastor, and an adult pastor. I've learned so many things, and a lot of things were things that didn't work. So I just want to share from my heart and my head some ways that have worked for me and people that I admire and look up to that will begin to fill in the gaps of not just your students, but your children at home, and even perhaps some gaps that you might be having yourself. Please consider the kids in your classroom during your remaining months, month and a half that you have left this summer, and how you can begin to become that seed that can fill in one of those gaps for your kids. God bless you guys. Thank you so much. And my prayer is, as a person of faith, that you are going to be able to be a light in the darkness for one star, for even one student. Sometimes we feel overwhelmed, but even if you can make a difference in the life of one child, it could be something that impacts a dozen people, 100, or perhaps even 1,000. So don't think that you have to change the world. Just imagine what it would be like to change one heart this coming school year. And let's just start with our own. God bless you guys and have a great day.